If you got some money to burn and would like to support my channel, check out J-List or Play Asia. If you don't need games or Japanese imports, be sure to support my channel on Patreon or Maker Support. The links to everything mentioned can be found in the video description.
So this is Louis, and it is quite early in the morning, and I'm not really going off of many hours of sleep. But I'm going to try to hammer out this commentary, and I will apologize up front because I realize I'm doing this. I might slur certain words, and it's because I'm tired. So I will address that right now so that if I go back later in editing and realize, oh, I slurred this word, I slurred that word, well, it just happened. You know what I mean? It's early, and I'm going to do this now because later on I'm going to be too fucked up to do this. And I want to talk about this because I'm going to be covering a few issues in one, and I think I can do that in a concise manner. And I will be talking about the faults of mainstream media, why people don't watch it, the faults of Fox News, and why I don't watch them, and why I don't like mainstream right-wing hosts. Now, there are commentators on YouTube and that I don't like that are right-wing, such as Steven Crowder. I don't like Steven Crowder. I don't find him to be particularly honest in his arguments. But the comparison would be to someone like Mark Steyn, Tucker Carlson, Bill O'Reilly, and others who are either overly aggressive or fail to actually argue well on important topics that they should know more about. I mean, you could extrapolate this, and I say mainstream news, you can extrapolate this to CNN, MSNBC, NBC, but it's one of the reasons I don't like Fox News and why Tucker Carlson suffers on that network, because all day, every day, they go up against incredibly weak pundits that they intentionally bring on. So if you watch Fox News, you will see the same Democratic pundits, left-wing pundits, feminist pundits. You'll see the same people pop up over and over and over again. And one of the things you'll realize by listening to the arguments that happen on the shows is that those pundits that they intentionally keep inviting back are incredibly weak in their arguments. They're they stumble, they bumble, they are dishonest, they use shitty tactics, just bald-faced dickhead tactics that are dishonest in the way that one would argue. I see this same bald Democratic candidate that pundit that they bring on all the time. He's terrible. There is this lunatic feminist that runs some really obscure website she's brunette and pretty plain. They bring her on all the time on multiple shows. She is terrible. They do this on all these different shows with all these different hosts. These same people keep coming on to represent left-wing issues, and they are terrible. They do this to argue against weak actors so that they look good in their arguments. And the cost of that is making yourself less and less sharp in the way that you argue, so that when you actually have on someone that is very good in their arguments, you get decimated by them. And I've actually seen a couple segments on Tucker Carlson's show where he has brought on a congressman or a pundit or an activist that is left-wing that knows what they're fucking doing. And Tucker Carlson is doing everything in his power to try to win that argument and failing to do so. That isn't the guest's fault. That's Tucker's fault. I won't be able to find this segment, but there was a segment where he brought on this Democratic congressman who I've never heard of before. He came on Tucker's show, and they had a very serious debate about something. I don't remember what it was about. And this Democratic congressman was doing very well against Tucker. And you could tell Tucker wasn't laughing. He wasn't fucking around. He was serious about this conversation. And you could tell that this was actually a very serious debate. And Tucker was losing. I just liked that segment, not because I thought the Democratic congressman was, a winning candidate or someone I should pay attention to, but it showed the weakness of Tucker Carlson, where he has gone up against too many shitty pundits that he specifically picks out that are regular Fox contributors that make him weaker. The way that you make yourself stronger as someone that is a professional commentator, activist, or pundit is you go up against incredibly strong people to make yourself stronger in your arguments. When you can weave around the tactics of others, the arguments of others, when you can adopt stronger arguments and stronger tactics and have additional knowledge that your everyday person wouldn't have, that's what makes you stronger. And if you don't have that knowledge, if you don't understand the tactics, and you are weaker in your arguments, just on a basic level, then you will fail to win arguments. What is true for Tucker Carlson is true for a whole litany of different hosts, and it's also true for Mark Steyn. I've seen Mark Steyn sub in for Rush Limbaugh, who I don't listen to because I can't stand Rush Limbaugh, but I've seen Mark Steyn sub in more and more for Tucker Carlson on Fox News. So here's one segment that you have with Mark Steyn subbing in for Tucker Carlson, where he has brought on someone that, as far as I can tell, is not the average guest. It's a transgender activist that is masquerading as a scientist. So in this segment, there are three big things that Mark Steyn completely fails to address. And when he fails to address those three things, he falls on his face in the segment. And you could argue that he's being more relaxed in this segment, but him being relaxed in this segment allows this activist to make three big claims that are very much false, are very much demonstrably false, and are illegitimate arguments to make. And when you are relaxed in that way and you're talking about a very serious issue, you fail as a pundit, as a host, as a commentator, when you do not address her arguments. You just allow her to say whatever the fuck she wants, and you just roll over. You look incredibly weak in this segment. You look incredibly weak as a commentator when you fail to address these kind of arguments in the ways that she presents them. It's like, if you want to win on this issue, which I obviously think I would assume Mark Steyn is way more conservative than me on the issue of transgenderism, but he fails to actually address any of the things that she says in a way that would actually push back against what is clearly just propaganda. So that is a fault that is not unique to Mark Steyn. It's a fault that exists in mainstream media with mainstream hosts on Fox News and with Fox News hosts. They are not good. They are very weak in their arguments, in the way that they stylize themselves. Like, they have very big, flamboyant personalities half the time, which is one of the things I can't stand about right-wing commentators. They shit all over Milo Yiannopoulos. Oh, Milo Yiannopoulos is this character. He has this massive personality. It's like, yeah, so do 80% of the hosts on fucking Fox News. And yet, like, even with these personalities, they completely fail to win arguments when they absolutely should. So it's like the arguments that they make against all these different people that are in alternative media don't stand up to scrutiny when they themselves fail to actually make arguments. When I know for a fact, if you took an alternative host like Paul Joseph Watson, like Milo Yiannopoulos, or even Steven Crowder, which I don't remember if I said in this already whether I like him or not. I don't like Steven Crowder. If you had these people in the position of Mark Steyn, they'd be able to make these arguments. They'd pick up on what this activist says, they'd be able to discredit her, they'd be able to win this argument, and it would make a lot of difference. Anyways, I'm going off on a tangent. Let's just get to this segment.
A biological male winning a gold medal in a women's event now seems a matter of when, not if. Joanna Harper is transgendered and an athlete, and argues that transgender competitors don't enjoy any advantage.
So I'm going to cut this a little bit short. Mark Steyn introduces this transgender activist who is masquerading as a scientist, and one of the things that Mark Steyn fails to do right after he introduces her is to address the fact that she is an activist first and a scientist second. He introduces her as a scientist, and that is incorrect. She is not a scientist first. She is an activist first. She is biased on this issue because she literally is transgender. You should have addressed that, Mark Steyn. You failed to do so.
Joanna, there are a lot of people who in this age of gender fluidity take a relaxed view of it and accept that you can choose which bathroom to use and all that. But that when it comes to sport, when it comes to who's the fastest, who's the strongest, when you're running around a 400-meter track, that basically from gender fluidity, we're back to two biological sexes in which those who are born male have a distinct advantage. Where are they going wrong on that?
Well, first of all, biology is actually quite complex. And so to suggest that that biology is dimorphic is incorrect. But it is certainly true that people who have gone through male puberty especially do have substantial advantages.
So this is the second issue that I have with this segment, and the biggest sin out of everything said, in that she flatly says that humans as a species are not sexually dimorphic, which as far as I know is, even just a layman, is demonstrably false. Males and females are different in a litany of ways. As far as I'm aware, the gender activists masquerading as scientists that have disputed this have always been refuted. The gender activists that have disputed the differences in male and female brains have been refuted, and maybe I'll try to find some actual data to say this. But the big one that I'm aware of that they've been refuted on, that they can't actually argue against, is bone density and muscle density. Those are the big two that are different, other than, you know, the sexual reproductive differences. If there are studies that refute those things, present them, because I haven't seen them. I've only seen shit studies that have then gone on to be refuted them, you know, by itself. Those studies have been refuted by other scientists and actual credible studies, because the people behind those studies in the first place were gender activists, not scientists. And this carries back to the first thing I had a problem with, where Mark Stein doesn't actually make that distinction. Almost always, with gender activists that are talking about these issues, that are social constructivists, they will bias their studies to prove their fucking social constructivist arguments. They aren't actually impartial. They aren't actually objective. They aren't actually pursuing truth. They're trying to pursue their own ideological ends. It is worth making that distinction because it calls into question the credibility of these people making authoritative arguments. Humans are a sexually dimorphic species. I've not seen credible evidence to say that that is not true, and that is a massive part of all of this. That is why, when you go in to talk about sports, why it's so important. Because if you have a male competing against a female, the male has an incredible amount of advantages. And that includes bone density, muscle mass. That doesn't mean that women can't compete with men or shouldn't play with men on a casual basis. But when we're talking about the Olympics, when there's all this different testing for all these different things, this is something that should be taken seriously. Because when, and this is just the standard news story to where it's become a stereotype, if you put a transgender woman against women, biological women, the transgender women whoops their fucking asses and injures them, especially if it's a competitive sport. The women get injured by the transgender women. This is something that should be controversial because it is. You know, if I had a daughter, I wouldn't want her competing in sports against a trans woman because she is far more likely to be injured, especially if it's a competitive sport. And I'm not saying one way or the other. You know, I would fall on the side of those trans women not being able to compete. That would be where I would fall in terms of my personal beliefs. But this should be controversial because it is. This is something that is going up against reality, is going up against biological reality. And yet, you want to just dismiss this out of hand because you are a fucking social constructivist. You are an ideologue. Mark Stein should be able to refute this because he does this professionally. I shouldn't be having to do this as a fucking investigator sitting on a case at 6 a.m. when I got up at fucking 3 to drive out here, okay? I shouldn't be the guy doing this. It should be you, the professional. But this is what I mean. Alternative media is more useful than the mainstream because the mainstream for whatever reason, can't even bring up these incredibly salient points.
So there are different issues than with transgender athletes, and it's important to separate the two. But again, it is important to have fair play. It is important to that introducing intersex and/or transgender athletes does not overly affect the playing field that exists. And transgender athletes in particular are hugely underrepresented in women's sports.
Well, we'll see.
In other words, if you were to look at the population of transgender athletes, you would expect that there would be a lot more athletes than there actually are.
So the third part of this segment that is incredibly important to dispute and to mention and to argue is when this activist talks about the number of transgender women that are alive to compete. So the number of trans women that exist to compete against women. When, in fact, where she says that there are going to be, millions and millions to compete with actual biological women, the reality is that trans women are such a fucking minority, are such a infinitesimally small number of people on the face of this earth, that it is ridiculous to change standards and to make exceptions for them when they are so incredibly small that the probability of a trans woman activist being in the Olympics in the first place is absurd. It is such a small probability, it is absurd to even warrant to even grant this as an argument. It is absurd. It could happen, especially in the United States. If you're headhunting athletes in fucking San Francisco in the Bay Area, yeah, you're a lot more likely to pick people up there, because especially with all the ideology there. But when we're talking about fucking Iran or Brazil or Argentina or fucking Japan or where the fuck ever, wherever is not the Bay Area, the likelihood that you would actually recruit a transgender woman to compete in the female Olympics is so infinitesimally small that it would be like finding an albino to compete in the Olympics. It's so fucking fringe that it is not even worth discussing. The only reason why it's being discussed is because of the United States, because of our hyper-focus on this infinitesimally small fringe group in our society. It's because of our own ridiculous politics. That is why it's even being entertained as an argument. And so, that statistical reality is so worthy of note that any conservative commentator should know it, should be able to comment on it. That is what is so unbelievable about this segment. I mean, one of the several things about it that's so ridiculous that Mark Stein fails to address is that trans women are so fucking small as a population in the country with the most of them, which is the United States. You should note this, Mark Stein. You should know this. You should be able. This should be on the tip of your tongue. This should be the first card you draw when you're talking about this, and especially when your activist guest brings it up, you should be able to refute it right there and then. But you completely fall on your face and fail to do it. This is incredibly important to the argument of transgenderism. Transgender women is a small fringe group in our society and is incredibly Western. So extrapolating this incredibly American political issue onto the world is disingenuous and dishonest on its face. You cannot be honestly saying that when we're talking about Saudi Arabia, we're talking about Qatar, we're talking about fucking Romania, that somehow this is going to be a relevant topic to them. It isn't. It isn't. And any honest actor is going to admit that. This is a fucking American issue. This is maybe even a Canadian issue. This is a fucking UK issue, maybe. But this is an incredibly American issue. This is very specific to our societies with these ridiculous gender bender politics. Okay? Our nations, these very few nations, these very wealthy nations, These nations are the nations where it's specifically relevant. In every other nation, it isn't. To fail to address that is to fail to be fucking honest about this issue. Okay? So I'm going to end this quickly because I've run out of time by saying that I think that, this is not just a one-off segment of me dumping on Mark Stein and this transgender activist. It is trying to explain why millennials, young people, and many people have turned away and have shunned mainstream media. This is not simply, the fucking dickhead loser millennials are looking for big personalities like Paul Joseph Watson and Milo Yiannopoulos, or even myself with our big personalities or flamboyant attitudes. It is the fact that we are able to address issues from a perspective with more knowledge and better arguments than the people on mainstream media. These are not hard arguments. This is not even what I do for a living, and yet I am able to do it better than you. Okay? Maybe you're able to argue economics and other things better than me, Mark Stein, but you fail to address this issue that you fucking brought up. You chose to have a segment on this. You completely fell on your face. It's embarrassing. It should be embarrassing for you. As someone that does it for a living, you should be able to do this. I am able. You aren't. I mean, this is the thing. Millennials are turning to alternative media because alternative media is doing it better than the mainstream. That is the fact of the matter. Say whatever you want to about my generation. We do it better than you do as it relates to argumentation. We do it better. So all credit goes to even cocksucker Gen Xers like Sargon. That's why Sargon is exploding in popularity. It's why he's becoming big, and all these different media outlets with their billions of dollars are failing to attract a fucking audience. It's because Sargon, just despite being one guy, does it better than they do. Even with their fucking fact checkers and their producers and their fucking crews and all the rest and their millions of dollars in corporate backing, they can't do it. They can have all the money in the world. It doesn't mean a goddamn difference if you fail in actually presenting good arguments. That's what people are looking for. They're looking for knowledge. They're looking for argumentation. They're seeking the truth as they should. And they are not finding what they're looking for on the mainstream networks. And that's why they're turning to alternative media. And I'm fine with that. I want Tucker Carlson and Mark Stein and all these different hosts to be better than where they are now, but I don't think they're going to do it. Whether it's laziness or whatever, they're unwilling to actually adapt to the change in the market and to compete with people on alternative media, on YouTube or wherever. They're failing to compete, and so they're getting fucking smoked in terms of popularity and the changing generations. I'll leave it there because I gotta go, but thanks for listening.